He sprayed a motel floor in complete darkness, and within seconds, a blue-white sheen began to trace a route no witness had managed to preserve, across the carpet, through the doorway, into open night. 3 days earlier, staff had scrubbed the room until it looked suitable for the next paying guest. Chemistry disagreed. Blood, as it turned out, had a longer memory than management. This is the central question that refuses retirement. If a reagent can retrieve what deliberate effort tried to erase, has violence ever truly vanished? Or has it simply waited in abeyance for the correct light? A Florida motel room, the sort built for transience and amnesia, with thin walls, stale air conditioning, and curtains that looked as if they had been washed against their will. Officer Stone entered and started with the banal inventory. Disorder on the surfaces. Red-brown staining on fabric and tile. Near the bathroom threshold, a partial shoe impression, tread still crisp in a residue that was clearly not mud. None of this, on its own, proved homicide. Rooms like this exist after drunken collisions with furniture, domestic shouting matches, and accidents too mundane to make the evening news. A stain can be blood, wine, rust, or old cleaning fluid gone theatrical under bad lighting. A shoe mark can come from anyone who stepped in source and kept walking. Stone was not employed to narrate possibilities. He was employed to secure facts. So the routine began. And routine is the least glamorous virtue in criminalistics. Inspect, photograph, sketch, measure, collect. Lens angles were logged. Distances were fixed. Surfaces were mapped until the room ceased to be a room and became a coordinate grid in which each mark occupied a defensible position. No one calls this cinematic. In court, that is an advantage. Evidence survives because it is tedious before it is persuasive. The visible traces allowed a plausible reconstruction. Struggle, injury, movement, exit, voluntary departure remained technically possible. So did coercion. Meanwhile, the cleaning crew had already done what cleaning crews are paid to do: restore order quickly and move on. Scenes are almost always compromised this way, not by malice, but by the bureaucracy of normal life reasserting itself before anyone agrees on what normal was 5 hours earlier. Then, they killed the lights. Inside the dark, a forensic specialist stepped forward with a spray bottle of Luminol, the presumptive blood reagent that reacts with iron and hemoglobin and emits cold bioluminescence. The chemistry is elegant and faintly merciless. Luminol does not care about intent, reputation, or narrative convenience. It does not ask whether blood is recent, diluted, or aggressively mopped. It only responds to presence where unaided sight reports absence. The first mist settled onto the carpet. Blue-white points ignited, then connected. Not noise, pattern. Long streaks emerged from the center of the room toward the door, running in rough parallel. The geometry consistent with a body dragged by the ankles. Lower on the doorframe, handprints appeared at the height of desperate resistance, as if someone reached back while being pulled through an opening. Another set of shoe impressions surfaced as well, deeper, steadier, more deliberate than the partial prints Stone had documented in ambient light. 3 days after soap, water, and institutional optimism had pronounced the room clean, the floor produced a map of violence that bleach had failed to censor. At this point, lesser documentaries would cue ominous strings and jump straight to conviction. In the TED-Ed scenario presented by Dr. Theodore Yeshion, the case is resolved quickly. The interesting part is not speed. The interesting part is implication. A surface can be visually pristine while chemically saturated with trace evidence. The eye accepts cleanliness. The molecule withholds corroboration. That contradiction places every scrubbed tile, repainted wall, and laundered textile into epistemic suspense, innocent to one instrument, incriminating to another. Yeshion treats this not as forensic theatre, but as methodology. Luminol is not merely a trick for catching killers who own disinfectant. It is a tool for disputing institutional certainty, for challenging what police departments, courts, hospitals, property owners, and governments are willing to classify as clean enough to forget. The motel room in Florida was never the full story. It was a demonstration, almost a preface, delivered by a scientist whose career gave him unusual authority to make uncomfortable claims. Dr. Ted Yeshion serves as Professor of Criminal Justice and Criminalistics at Gannon University, with formal training that runs from pre-medical biology at York College to forensic science at George Washington University to a doctorate in science education from SUNY Buffalo. He began in 1975 at the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, later retired from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in 1999, and then continued through private forensic consulting. Across 41 years, he worked as forensic scientist, laboratory director, special agent, and expert witness, testifying for prosecution and defense in hundreds of criminal and civil matters involving serology, DNA analysis, and crime scene reconstruction. One specialty made him internationally known: application and interpretation of luminol as a presumptive test for blood. His work was cited during People v. O.J. Simpson, the trial of the century. He became a Fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences and chaired the Science Subcommittee for Pennsylvania's Joint State Government Commission on Wrongful Convictions. In private practice, he assisted in exonerations of factually innocent people who had served about 20 years on average before release. Bureaucracies call that correction. The calendar calls it a life. And then he kept pushing luminol into deeper time. He used it in criminal cases as old as 20 years, at Gettysburg on Civil War ground, and on artifacts carbon dated between 5,000 and 10,000 years old. In a grant-funded Bennington battlefield project in Walloomsac, New York, he and colleagues examined 136 Revolutionary War musket balls, buckshot, and slugs with luminol, detecting blood more than 230 years after the fighting stopped. The motel file closed. The archive expanded. Procedural certainty in that room for that week was achievable. Philosophical certainty never was. If blood can remain legible after mops, decades, and even centuries, how many verdicts have depended less on innocence or guilt than on what investigators failed to illuminate? The question that closed part one, how many verdicts depended on what investigators failed to illuminate, carries an uglier corollary most audiences prefer to avoid. Someone had to know not only how to make blood appear, but how to make certainty disappear. Theodore Yeshion took a route that sounded sterile on paper and became surgical in practice. A B.S. in pre-medical biology from York College at CUNY, an M.S. in forensic science from George Washington University, and later a PhD in science education from SUNY Buffalo. 3 institutions, 3 calibrations of focus, the aperture narrowed from life sciences to legal consequence, from how tissue behaves to how evidence speaks under oath. This was not academic drift, it was design. He entered the profession in 1975 with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and the year matters. Back then, forensic serology lived in glassware, pipettes, and patient hands. Analysts leaned on blood typing and precipitin testing, while ambiguity sat quietly in the room like a second examiner. DNA profiling had not yet arrived to flatter everyone with precision. Yeshion learned to read bloodstains before the discipline had finished inventing its own grammar. Then came Florida, a 24-year arc at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, ending in retirement in 1999, after roles that many professionals spend whole careers chasing one at a time: forensic scientist, crime lab director, spécial agent consultant. By the end, 41 years of combined service across laboratory benches, investigative corridors, and witness stands. He testified in hundreds of criminal and civil matters, sometimes for prosecutors, sometimes for defense. That detail is not ornamental. One-sided testimony creates advocates. Two-sided testimony creates method. By the time his work appeared in the most watched American legal spectacle of the century, People v. O.J. Simpson, Yeshion was already internationally known for luminol interpretation. The reference was less a trophy than an admission. Courts needed someone who could explain what the glow meant, and, with equal rigor, what it refused to mean. That distinction becomes the hinge on which the Motel case swings. Luminol is a presumptive test for blood. Presumptive, not confirmatory. In darkness, the spray blooms into blue-white chemiluminescence, and suddenly a dull motel carpet looks like a topographic map of assault. The reaction can be catalyzed by iron in hemoglobin. It can also be catalyzed by copper, bleach residue, horseradish peroxidase, and other oxidizers with no biography of violence attached to them. A glowing floor does not convict anyone. It proposes a question in fluorescent ink. Yeshion treated that question with a severity that made him useful to prosecutors and inconvenient to them at the same time. In the Motel scenario, the visible red-brown stains had already suggested a struggle. Then came the partial shoe track, then the meticulous procession, photographs, measurements, sketches, collection logs, chain of custody discipline, and finally, luminol, in a dimmed room where every breath seemed louder than it should. What emerged was not drama, but syntax. Drag marks angling toward the parking lot, hand impressions low along the baseboard, interrupted contact points that mapped movement rather than mayhem. Surfaces had been cleaned. Sequence had not. Within a week, the case reached procedural resolution through geometry, not instinct, smear angle, stride interruption, transfer spacing. The mechanical logic of a body moved quickly by someone who did not have enough time. But court is not a lab. It is a chamber that rewards finality, and finality has poor patience for nuance. Jurors want closure. Judges want durable rulings. Defense counsel wants fissures in the narrative. Luminol, by definition, creates those fissures, even while disclosing hidden traces. So Yeshion's skill was never merely chemical. It was hermeneutic. He had to stand between a blue glow and 12 citizens, then translate pattern, concentration, and context into language sturdy enough to survive cross-examination. Why this reaction, in this room, in this distribution, aligned with blood rather than cleaning agents or metal contamination. His institutional credentials reflected that burden. He became a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences and later chaired the Science Subcommittee for the Pennsylvania Joint State Government Commission on Wrongful Convictions. The title sounded bureaucratic. The work was accusatory. Because the same methodology used to place suspects inside violent scenes could also demonstrate that prior investigators had misread stains, ignored patterns, or never tested crucial surfaces at all. After 1999, in private consulting, he helped secure the release of several factually innocent people who had served an average of 20 years in prison. 20 years is long enough for children to become adults, for neighborhoods to erase memories, for an institution to call itself correct, simply because it has run out of appetite for revision. The chemistry did not evolve into morality. It remained chemistry. What changed was whether institutions chose to apply it completely. Courts pursue closure. Chemistry pursues residue. They coexist the way pressure and fault lines coexist, quietly until they do not. Yeshion's significance was never celebrity. It was friction at the exact coordinate where laboratory method collides with legal convenience. A reagent indifferent to human narratives could illuminate guilt and innocence with the same cold light, and that indifference was precisely the point. In hindsight, the Motel case reads less like a solved episode than an opening chapter. Because once luminol can reopen convictions decades after sentencing, the frame widens. What happens when the spray bottle turns away from motel carpets and cinder block walls and toward battlefields, relics, and objects older than any modern courtroom evidence that has waited in silence for centuries or millennia, for someone willing to ask the wrong question at the right time. Florida, 20 years after the murder. Floorboards had been trampled by tenants, landlords, inspectors filing reports nobody read. Humidity warped the wood. Cheap linoleum went down, came up, went down again. Beneath all of it, the iron hemoglobin bond waited with geological patience. Luminol touched the surface, and the glow arrived with the same chemiluminescent certainty seen when blood is still wet. Yeshion logged it as calibration. Then came the chronological rupture. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 51,000 casualties across 3 days in July 1863. Tourists buy replica kepis, photograph monuments, and leave on schedule. The grass is manicured. The soil keeps a different archive. Luminol contacted Civil War-era artifacts from that ground. Blue-white signal returned. Not metaphor. Chemistry. More than 130 years after the last wounded soldier was carried from the field, hemorrhage remained in objects museums had catalogued as inert. The Bennington project operated under tighter discipline. Grant-funded, controlled, methodical. Yeshion and colleagues examined 136 Revolutionary War musket balls, buckshot, and slugs recovered from Walloomsac, New York, August 1777, when American militia routed 2 detachments of Burgoyne's army, each projectile tested individually. Luminol responded to blood residue more than 230 years after those rounds passed through tissue, lodged in bone, and struck earth already saturated with the dying. 136 discrete objects. No theatrical unveiling. Quiet, repeatable confirmations. Skepticism dismantled by tedium rather than spectacle. Its implication for forensic science was substantial. Its implication for everything else was vertiginous. The temporal frontier did not stop in the 18th century. Yeshion applied luminol to artifacts carbon dated between 5,000 and 10,000 years old. Provenance and archaeological context matter. The epistemic detonation matters more. At that scale, crime scene loses jurisdictional meaning. No perpetrator to charge, no family to notify, no detective waiting for results. Only brute biological fact, something bled and left a record more durable than the civilization built over it. At this resolution, violence exits criminology and enters anthropology. A motel homicide and a Neolithic conflict separate by procedure, not category, different paperwork, identical hemoglobin. The reagent is amoral in the strictest sense. It illuminates iron and oxygen without commentary. Intellectual honesty still requires the contrarian pause. Luminol is presumptive, not confirmatory. It reacts with hemoglobin and with certain plant peroxidases, copper compounds, household bleach, horseradish peroxidase. Defense attorneys exploited that. Prosecution experts contextualized it. Across hundreds of proceedings, Yeshion's interpretive discipline, honed over 41 years, separated a glowing surface from admissible finding. Chemistry provides signal. Scientist provides meaning. Confuse the two, and innocence can disappear behind procedure. This is the institutional edge. Fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, chairman of the Science Subcommittee for the Pennsylvania Joint State Government Commission on Wrongful Convictions. Yeshion occupied a rare position, practitioner and standards governor in one body. His private consulting contributed to the release of several factually innocent people who had served an average of 20 years. Same methodology, opposite outcomes, depending on rigor or confirmation bias wearing a lab coat. His visibility extended beyond courtrooms. The History Channel featured him on History's Greatest Mysteries, analyzing evidence in the D.B. Cooper case, America's only unsolved airline hijacking. The invitation was not ornamental. Producers needed an interpretive framework that could survive public scrutiny. in a case sustained by 6 decades of amateur speculation and institutional embarrassment. The unknown giant thesis crystallizes without sentiment. Yeshion's legacy is not one solved case or one exoneration. It is a demonstration repeated across centuries and across adversarial tables that mops, bleach, time, soil, and administrative forgetting do not delete. They stage deletion. Blood can outlast memory and the civilization that produced the wound. The unresolved question is no longer whether forensic science can detect the past. It can. The question is what a culture does when its oldest surfaces begin to glow. And somewhere in a Pennsylvania archive, a file marked Yeshion lands on a desk it was never meant to reach. The motel room goes dark again. Not from failure, but completion. And completion in forensic science arrives with a hush no verdict form can transcribe. Flash units had popped, tape measures snapped open, graphite dragged across sketch paper. Now noise is gone. Drag marks mapped. Handprints catalogued. Partial shoe track matched. Officer Stone's first reading, disorder, red-brown staining, signs of struggle, was not overturned by Luminol's blue-white bloom, but sharpened into geometry. Conviction followed within days. Administrative closure, efficient and antiseptic. Case solved did not mean question solved. It exposed one premise with unnerving precision. Surfaces keep what institutions discard. Inquiry was never whether detectives could solve one bloody motel. Inquiry was whether violence disappears or is merely renamed as forgotten. The answer is blunt. Erasure is bureaucratic theatre. Luminol proved that arc in sequence, motel darkness, courtroom scrutiny during People v. O.J. Simpson, Civil War terrain at Gettysburg, 136 Revolutionary War projectiles from Bennington, and artifacts carbon dated between 5 and 10,000 years old. Theodore Yeshion's 41 years in laboratories, field sites, and witness boxes formed one empirical argument repeated over widening time. Blood persists, chemistry holds, human attention flickers. Conclusion carries force because method outran opinion, not conjecture, reagent, and residue. Grant-funded fieldwork, chain of custody discipline, hundreds of testimonies built case by case until clean became a claim that had to survive darkness. Yeshion's trajectory. North Carolina, SBI in 1975, Florida Department of Law Enforcement until 1999, private consulting, professorship at Gannon University, fellowship in the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, chairmanship on wrongful convictions, televised D.B. Cooper analysis, reads less like career progression than serial indictment. Same disclosure, different jurisdiction. Motel carpet, battlefield soil, ancient toolstone, medium changes, luminescence does not. At structural scale, the asymmetry is one institution's avoid naming. Human memory is selective and perishable. Material record is stubborn and impolite. Courts require finality. Verdict entered, sentence imposed, file closed. National myth requires curation, monument to valor, footnote for cost. Personal alibi leans on time. Betting decay will do what denial cannot. Luminol is indifferent to every dependency. Week-old homicide or 230-year-old wound, iron catalysis does not salute narrative priority. By contrast, every system touching violence operates on an implicit covenant that time assists forgetting. Reagent exposes that covenant as design, not destiny. Forgetting, then, is engineered. That is why Yeshion's significance is austere rather than heroic. He did not alter outcomes through charisma or posture as Lone Crusader. He made procedure reproducible. A trained technician in any jurisdiction with Luminol's solution and a darkened room can challenge what paperwork calls clean. No violin score required, no cinematic confession, quiet revolution, deeper cut. Several people Yeshion helped exonerate had served an average of 20 years, not because exculpatory trace never existed, but because the right surface was never sprayed in the right darkness at the right moment. Institutional tempo moved faster than evidentiary patience. Evidence waits, institutions schedule. Seen this way, the motel room is less location than paradigm. A disorderly space offers one narrative at first glance. Visible marks suggest sequence. Chemical interrogation produces a second sequence with fewer sentimental assumptions. Between apparent and actual lies, fertile ground for wrongful conviction, battlefield dead reduced to aggregate, and millennia of blood recoded as prehistory and filed as harmless antiquarian debris. Yeshion's work narrows that gap without ideology. Oxidation reactions, photon emission, ion-driven catalysis proceeding with merciless neutrality. Clarity arrives, but comfort does not. Exonerated defendants do not recover stolen decades. Dead at Bennington remain dead. Anonymous people whose blood marked 10,000-year-old artifacts left no names, affidavits, or appellate pathways. Forensic progress expands the knowable past while leaving irreversible loss intact. That disproportion is the discipline's most candid feature, almost monastic in severity. Glow fades quickly, darkness returns on schedule, residue remains beneath paint, grout, asphalt, varnish, memorial bronze, whatever civilization applies to appear finished. If violence never truly disappears, what has history been measuring this entire time?